Okay, so let's jump into our Rhino space. So I might have gotten a little more uh, carried away than I'd planned for this tiny house. Um, they're kind of fun, so I hope you're enjoying your studio because it's kind of a fun exercise to I don't know, just free design. Um, yeah, I took a crack at trying out a few different modeling strategies. So I actually worked in conjunction with my site. So that's kind of something I think I've gotten used to it. I guess like as I work as I build the site around my project, that starts to feed into what I am designing for the project, and it kind of all that information kind of feeds together. And I really haven't been thinking about it, or maybe get used to just that process. But I think that's kind of something important to note is that they can happen, you know, in sync with each other. So, um, so yeah. So saying that, I took a stab at trying to render this. So I built up the same scene for both V-Ray and for Enscape, and each one has their own sort of tools, right? There's a kind of asset library for V-Ray where you can, input your own grass, input your own water. Uh, I pulled those trees off of the V-Ray website, which are just more assets um, there, and then adjusted the scene lighting, added some fog for my. I decided this is going to be an Oregon cabin in the high mountains. Um, so that's V-Ray. And then for Enscape, I took the the same strategy where I was going to kind of keep the same location, but play with what they had available to me. So I used their grass version, their pond, and then started playing with their asset library, which you can see I found Pepper the dog there, and I thought that kind of made this look a little more homey. But you can see how the time of day changed, right? Like here, I don't really have too much intent in my. I'm actually not even really that clear. I think what time of day is it? It's supposed to be, I think, 2 o'clock in the afternoon in like June, but I'm not sure it's wholly clear. However, the it's a little more photoreal, right? You just looking at the qualities between the two. Um, it could definitely use a little more work, I think, especially for scale of grass as far as the scene goes, and then maybe adding some of that background, that I get to just click a button and there it is in Enscape. Um, however, there's no, it's difficult to scale that background and whatever. There are difficulties. There, positives and negatives, I should say, not difficulties, but there, positives and negatives to teach program. It's just, I was curious to spend time with each of them. So then this was another view. This was in V-Ray space, again, using their background. I'm going to be harsh on myself and say my grass looks like it's like and it makes this look super tiny, like this is a house for ants or something. It's so long and stringy. So I think that needs some work. Versus Enscape, where it becomes this, like, it's almost like a cartoon um, with its sort of the way it renders the trees and the sky and the grass. Um, but so it does get the point across, and it also allows, very quickly for me to see uh, my design and what's happening there. This is my interior render, which you'll notice all of my interior renders from V-Ray are extremely fuzzy, and that's because of my lack of patience with making them render versus Enscape, where this is instant. Um, so far as the quality of the image goes, though, again, it's a little more. Uh, it was an attempt to have like a photoreal image versus a kind of maybe not as nuanced um, rendering of the same space. again, for the interior, I added assets. So this is what we'll learn at the end of class, is just finding the assets and then downloading them, bringing them in. And then we can talk about perhaps material changes, which I started for these and then didn't get to the others. This is a residual one. It's just interesting, right? The quality of light. This still has the lighting in the space, but this one, I had the same lighting setting for both, right? I just did a, a render in one and then I did a render in the other. This required more, I would have needed to go in and turn up these lights again for V-Ray to get that same quality where I have some lighting here. I also need to add some, there's a bunch of, I obviously didn't focus on the materials or the lighting, which we'll do next week. But ideally, this is more like what you have for next week's homework assignment, where um, you've added your scene. There's some information outside of these windows. You've really adjusted your lighting. Okay, so like I've made sure that my lighting is coming in from the west here. I wanted this patch of light across the floor, this little bit of light coming through my window, and then I wanted the scene outside lit, because to me that was really important, that scene is making my space. It's making it homey by just being there. Same thing for this. I think I would actually spend more time for this render, especially adding maybe some more vegetation, some more trees, maybe a path to walk up. But it's building all of this exterior information that helps to support what it is that your design is for, right? Because it's not just a standalone. There's always context, or at least you hope there is, because otherwise it's probably not going to be built. But everything has a place, and this is you creating that place for that object. So that's what we'll do. We'll get started with some V-Ray grass, then I'll switch over to Enscape grass. Honestly, that'll probably take us till 3:30, so we will then take a 10-minute break and come back and try out some water and eventually bring in assets to our scene. So, all right, so let's start here. So I'm assuming that you have some base geometry, whether you're working in your studio project right now, the grasshopper piece that you're going to be working on, or you're just kind of keeping some base file for our classes. And I'm assuming you have some subject so that we can talk through these scene setups. Okay, so I'm going to turn off Pepper the dog, turn off some interior stuff, and then I'm going to start a new layer. And this one, I notice I already have sites. So I did the site for the morning class, and then this was my base site that I rendered. Okay. And if you can see what that looks like. So it's really just a surface. So I have a planar surface here that I rebuilt, and then I moved those points, right, like we've done before for our grasshopper exercises. I just started shifting those points up and down, and I made my own topography. You can actually use the same strategy if you have some, say if you had a civil drawing, and with the actual heights, you could use a similar strategy of just adjusting these moved this gumball shifts, depending on how accurate you want it, right? So maybe you're not going to build off of it, but it will give the I would say the impression of the actual site. So that's kind of the goal, right? You want them to understand what that site is doing for your project. That's why we're modeling it, because it has that information latent in it, and there's so much to be said about a site. So to get started, I'm going to lock this, turn this off, and then under my new B site, I'm going to create 3 sublayers. Okay, and another layer. Okay, there we go. 3 sub layers. I'm gonna click on this first one, turn off my cabin. Or no, I'll just lock it. I'll just lock that guy. Okay, I'm gonna rename this ground. I'm going to rename this next one water, and the last one I'll rename trees. Okay, so so for ground, and I'll turn these off even though there's nothing on them, but just to be good. So for ground, like I said, I just created a planar surface as my base. Okay, so 2-point rectangular surface. We go to top, and then I held shift to create some sort of square. Okay, and this was going to be my new ground that I'm going to eventually make into all grass. So, and obviously, um, these extents can change depending on where you are, just like the material can change. Maybe it's not all grass, maybe it's all sand. Maybe it's something else that you're going to map for us. But for me, it's going to be all grass, and then maybe next week I'll add a path and some patio or some variations. So I'm just going to check my scale here. Yeah, it's about right. So you want to be careful with how big these ground swabs, whatever the extents are. And that's because if we're going to create all of this as grass, that is going to be that much space that has to run in the render engine. So we want just enough to give the impression of the site, but not too much so that it overloads our computer. So I'm going to type in rebuild to rebuild that surface I just made. And we could up this if we wanted to make it a finer points, right? So if I'll just do this and you can see what I mean. So I'm going to just keep it at default. And then I type in points on. So at 6 points, I get, these 9 quadrants for subdivision, which I can then select these points and hold Control to deselect the surface so that I only move these points up in space. Okay. So we'll move him a little higher. So you can see how, because of the spacing of this, it makes it a very gradual slope in between the points. If I were to have upped that U and V value, then this would become, I would make smaller pointed hills. Right? So maybe if I have sand dunes or something, that would be appropriate. But for my Oregon countryside estate, which is just a cabin in the woods, it's not really fitting. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to just make this so that I have some sort of valley here. Right? And in that valley, I'll be placing some water. Okay. So that means that this is actually going to shift. Right now, I kind of generally have it at located with the cabin at the center. However, I'm building my site around the cabin and not the cabin around my site. So I don't want to move any of my architectural geometry. I want that to always stay wherever it is built in relationship to my 0, 0 point. Okay, so and that's because if I were to say, okay, this is my geometry and this is my site, and now I've built my site like this, but my house needs to go up here, then oh, I'm just going to select my house, my cabin, and move it. It's not always, it's kind of a sloppy move because if you move this all together, you really need to make sure that you have all of your layers selected, all of your layers unlocked, anything unhidden. There's a lot of things that go into building that architectural model, and you don't want to just shift that all over. So it's better practice to adjust the ground about your architecture. So you can see here how my architecture is right now underground. So what I want to do is I want to kind of shift this want to use my gumball to just shift this around so that I can um, give it something to stand on, right? So, and some view. I want it to be up in the on the hillside. Notice I've kind of got my steps that I've added, so I want it to look over what is going to be my lake. Right, the lowest part here is going to be my lake. So if I go to my top view, I think that means I'm going to end up rotating this, which right now ortho is off. Okay, so I can just gently rotate this and shift this probably about there. Okay, and then I go back here and I check whether or not my house is submerged. Okay, so I probably have to raise this up. Maybe it's also some sort of Nordic house. Okay. Want to make sure that the whole thing is kind of sitting in the landscape. But I also don't want my steps submerged. Okay, well, that's good enough. I want to move on. So if I have my house sitting in the site now, and if I go to my top view, I can see that the site is rotated about that house. Now I can add any other sort of site topography, right? So I could start to cut this up and um, start to trace things. So if I wanted to say a certain portion of this to be a different kind of topography, I could just cut this and create one type of grass and another type of grass or whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this and create that lake that we saw. So I'm just going to select my water layer. I'm going to create another plane. Okay, in the top view, I'm going to make that plane larger than my original. Okay, so it overhangs it on all edges. I'll go back over here and I can see where that water comes in naturally. Okay, so if I start to lower this water level, you can see how it starts to cut into the valley. Probably not the best location for my house, actually. But I want it to be, if I go to my top view, I really want it to be about a third of the distance of this. So it changes to aquamarine so I can see. Okay. So if I look at my plan, I want it to be about a third of my overall, which it looks about right. And actually, I might even end up shifting this back a little bit. But this is going to then act as my water reservoir. What I can do is I can type in extrude curve and extrude these corner curves to cut my water plane. Okay, so I'm just going to type in B for both sides, so extrude in both sides. Pull this up, select these surfaces, and then type in trim. And select that water plane, and then that will trim, delete, escape, delete. That will trim my water plane to the edges, okay? Which means I can then select my base plane, my ground plane, type in trim, and then select the under portion of my water, right? So it's now cut to whatever that formation is of my landscape. I could do the same thing as well for my water to my ground, right? Because I don't want, if I'm going to add grass to this entire landscape, I don't want for it to be rendering grass underneath my water, taking up my memory. So type in trim. Okay, and there we have it. There's a kind of a water water feature, my house into the hillside, and then now it's just a matter of adding some materials. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my ground layer, lock my water layer. I might actually move this. It's really bothering me that it's so, I know, it's quite nitpicky. Oh, I locked my water layer. He's so close to the water, you know? It's like I feel like he's going to get flooded, which I realize is kind of silly when we're just talking about hypotheticals, but still. Um, okay, okay, unlock that. All right, so now we're going to go through and we're going to make our fur and our grass. And I said that right. It's fur in the V-Ray space. Before we do that, let's save because once we start adding fur, it requires a lot of memory usage and just general CPU power. So let's Control S, make sure that that's saved so that we can open it up if it crashes. Which it shouldn't, but if you're like what I did for the morning class, I tried to render water and also in V-Ray and then had Enscape open at the same time, which meant immediate crash. It's not fun. Okay, so I go to the V-Ray asset editor, which we've learned about last week, right? This is kind of home base for all of our controls. Um, if you don't already have this set up, you should quickly set up what we learned last week, which is you need to make sure you have your environment sky in place and your Rhino sun turned on. And remember that was under your options over here. Okay, we went to sun. With that selected, it will open up this new panel where we just have to select sun as on. We can choose our location, which I thought that, why is it saying it's in Denver? I had Portland. Okay, so my lighting's all wrong. No, it's not bad. Okay, so, and then I can adjust the time of day, right, time of year, great. Okay, so I need to make sure my Rhino sun is on, then go back to my V-Ray asset editor and take a look at these sliders, these parameters, right? We talked about how we control them. The horizon offset was what height the horizon's at. The blend angle is the blend angle between the sky and that horizon. The albedo color is a reflection off the ground. And then your size multiplier here is going to be the softness of your edge of your object. Sky model we changed from HOSEC to clear. This then gave us the option of changing the horizontal illumination, which is a nice way of kind of changing the time of day, or not time of day, but really the I would say the color, yeah, the color at the horizon, the horizontal illumination across the back of the sky. So you can kind of turn it down for a darker sort of render, or turn that up so it's the height of day. Then we learned about humidity ozone. Those aren't so super important. But the other key was making sure you go into your settings, go to your environment, and then setting up that sky. So you had to turn on this texture, click on that. It's going to take me to here, but in your options, if you don't have this set up, it should give you an option for sky. If you select that, then that will take you to, oops, what am I doing? That will take you to this textures tab where you'll then have your these same options, okay? The other key factor was, yes, under camera here, your exposure value. So you want to make sure that this exposure value is what you're using to control the brightness of the sun. So, you know, if you go into your Rhino sun, you can see that you also have this intensity multiplier. I would just leave that alone and make sure that you're just adjusting this. Like you keep your sun as is, it has the normal intensity, and then you just adjust your camera's exposure to that sun. And then we can also adjust the camera's white balance. Okay, that was the post-rendering image, or while it was rendering, it's to kind of, again, adjust the camera's representation of those colors. So an orangier color will actually cool the image down. And then, of course, your render output, making sure this is relatively small so we again don't kill our computer. The key is don't kill your computer. And then, of course, global illumination should be turned on. All right, so that's the setup. That's the basics. Everything we learned last week took an hour. That was 2 minutes. So this week now we have all these things set up. Now we're going to go and we're going to apply a material to the ground surface. And then we also have to apply what is called a fur texture as to that surface as well. So the first thing is to just make sure we have some sort of texture ready to go in our materials library here. Okay, so this is just going to be the color or the color plus a texture. So I have both set up. Okay, so I have my grass A is what I called it with some sort of grass texture. So I used my create asset button here at the bottom of my page. I chose materials and I went to generic. And then under generic, it'll create this default beautiful gray that is really just the adjustment of a color. Okay. So I can adjust that color, right? And then I can adjust the brightness and the darkness of that color. I am going to change the texture of that appearance for the diffuse using what is a bitmap. So I have to select this, go to bitmap, and then I need to have some JPEG ready for me to import. So I found these online on the wonderful world of Google. Okay, if we go to here, I'm going to show you if I did a simple grass texture search on Google Images. This is, yep, even how you do it once you get to professional world. I was kind of surprised. I thought there'd be some magic library. There's some libraries, but generally you still are finding some things online. So I guess it's universal resource. So to set up this search, you always want to, of course, select images, but tools, this little icon here will open up another menu below, and you can search for large images. Okay, that's kind of what I tend to try to always find something that's a nice, large, clear image. I also try to find something that isn't too contrasty, and by that I mean this is a good example, where there's a lot of contrast between the light and the dark in the image, and there's a lot of just overall texture to it that is kind of it's going to be too much information, and in fact it will start to look blobby or like tiled, I guess is another word. So I chose this first option for the morning class, and I quite like it. It has a nice uniform quality. There's no great change between the contrast and the light and the dark, and it has these kind of nice breaks in it for the ground below. But overall, a general uniform color. So I right click, I save this image as, and I always create, if I'm doing renders, there's always an assets folder that I will start to add to. And that is just because it keeps my organization clean. I can always go back into that and find it. And in fact, I should probably also have a secondary folder in here that is for my my SketchUp imports, right, of my 3D geometry versus my materials, because again, those start to add on to each other, and it becomes easier and quicker for you to just know that they're where they are in an organized folder structure. So that's how I got that. So notice this is where it's not showing me any of the other options because it's only asking for PNGs and JPEGs. So I'm going to choose that grass 3 again, which was that same texture. Select open. And then what will happen is it will create this sort of we'll add a bitmap to that diffuse so that notice how the color doesn't really have much of a difference anymore. Um, the image is being taken from this bitmap. Okay, so if I want to adjust the color of that bitmap, I need to go to the color manipulation and reduce the color gain. Or if I want to adjust the placement of this so that it's not that 90s video game tile, I need to go to the texture placement and start to adjust these values, which we'll see, and eventually we'll do that after we get the fur applied. But I'm just going to name this right now. Rename, we'll call this is going to be the very creative name of grass bean underscore. Okay, so that's going to be my grass texture. I also created a grass color. So um, this is actually what my fur is going to be, and then I created a separate color for this surface itself. Okay, because they're actually kind of two different geometries. There's the fur, and then there's the geometry that the fur is referencing. And we'll see that in a second. But you can go ahead and create another asset for materials. You can go to generic, and then again, we're going to rename this. I'll call it grass color. I'm breaking my naming convention. And then that's just a matter of changing that diffuse color to something else, which was a darker green. Okay, so and that's it. That's all I did. So now I can go into my Rhino space, select that whatever I want to have that grass texture, that fur, and then I will go to my V-Ray menu over here and select Add Fur to Selection. Okay, so if we zoom in, you can see these little weird tiny lines, and those mean that you have successfully added what is V-Ray grass to your scene. You can't see it yet because you haven't rendered, but that is grass, I promise you. So hopefully you're been using your named views, because I'm going to click on this now so that we get a nice clean view for our render. But we're going to do a quick interactive render using, remember we had the options here for, we have interactive for the little finger clicking over the teapot, and then just the teapot. This is a production render. This is the interactive render. Production is going to be a lot more intensive and nuanced, versus the interactive render will be much quicker. So I'm going to just click on that interactive render and allow it to go. We'll see what that grass looks like. Ooh, very long. It is a field of hair. Okay, so there are a few things that we're going to want to adjust in this, of course. Um, so we're going to use region render from now on, so that we can just render a small region of this, not overload our computer, right? And just check that this grass is updating appropriately. So if I go to my V-Ray asset editor, I go to the geometry. You can see I have two previous furs. One was the one I originally did, and it was for morning class, and now this is going to be fur 2. So there should be no adjustments. This should be what yours looks like. Okay. So if I take a look at what is being asked of me, so fur should be on, of course, that's a given. However, you can turn it off if it's distracting you or delaying your rendering time, you know, once you set it up, you can just go in here, turn it off, and then you know, move on with the rest of your scene setup. And then when you're ready to fully render, you can turn this back on again. Um, so if I go to my parameters drop down, the first option here is really a key one, which is the distribution of the grass on the surface. So you'll have two options, which is per face and by area. You'll want per area, and then you'll want to change this count for the area. Okay, so we'll first try to bring this up to about 5. I would say the max is 10. Okay. Okay, and you can see that here, this is quite sparse, so we know that we need to up that count. We also know that this grass is super, super long. Um, in fact, what's the height? The length it says is 4, and I'm working in feet. So this should mean that this is 4 feet. I think the most of V-Ray has like a sort of metric setup. So I think it's probably set for a default of 4 millimeters. Um, but since I'm working, you know, in a larger scale, I'm getting this much taller, um, taller grass. Okay, you can see that that's kind of helped to populate it a little bit more, but now I need to really adjust the length. So I'm going to say that this is a natural grassy area, but I think that 4 feet is a little too much, and I'm going to bring it down to say, we'll say that this is 1 foot maybe. It's a little bit shorter than 4 feet, so I think 1 foot might act well. Yeah, there we go. So that starts to kind of hug the perimeter of the building and give it some sort of density. Um, Other options we have here is thickness. So it's going to be the width of the grass. I think right now it's probably still a little bit thick because we're working in millimeters. So I would bring that down a little bit. Um, slenderize it. That's a word. Um, but yeah, make that a little thinner so that might require us to up the count a little bit more, just because it's less, you know, it's going to be less uniform or less dense. There we go, across the area. So then not that render. Um, and then we have our other options here. We have taper. Taper is going to be the form of the grass itself. So you can see our default here had this kind of nice width that slims down to a point, right? It has some nice taper on it, and that's because this is up really high. So if we had like a really nice natural grass prairie that we wanted to render, that would probably work really well because it's rarely cut, right? But if we have, say, a freshly cut lawn, we would probably want to bring that taper down, um, maybe even bring our length down, right? I would think we'd want to bring the length down, um, and then make sure that the variance isn't set very high, right? Because the mowed grass isn't very varied, it's pretty uniform. But for us, we could probably up the varied direction, okay, the variance of the direction. So they're going to start to move a little bit more um, wilder. Length could probably also be turned up quite a bit since it's not supposed to be kept grass. And if it's, say, it's supposed to all be one type of grass, depending, you know, you could vary the thickness if it's not. But I would think if it's all kind of the same, um, supposed to be the same, then I would think you would want to generally keep that where it is. And then both here we have the gravity and the bend, right? The gravity is going to be the weight of the grass itself. So that's going to influence then how much it's kind of bending over there. And then bend itself will also help with that. Okay, so probably the most important part, since we have a field of white grass right now, it doesn't really make much sense, is to add some material to it. So I think this probably is going to be pretty good for us. We can see it a little bit more clearly once we add some colors. So I'm going to go to the material option here and check that on. And then that's going to give me this drop-down menu that's taking my materials list, only my materials list from my V-Ray materials, right? So it's going to take this list and it's going to geometry input it here for us. So I would want to choose that grass B that we just made. Okay. And now, because it's a little bit of it's a bigger change than everything else, so you kind of have to give it a second. Okay, if we take off our region render, we'll get a better view. Okay, so it's looking a little bit better, right, so far as the grass height and density and whatnot, but there's still a couple of things that I think we need to adjust. One is obviously we're seeing still too much of that ground. So this ground here has a default coloring of white, and that is showing through our grass. So we don't want that. We want the ground to be a darker color, right? It's supposed to be shaded from our grass. So I'm going to turn this back on for my region render. I'm going to minimize both of these and go back into my layer. And then for my ground, I want to change that material for the whole thing. So I'm just going to select the material option here, and then use this drop-down menu to select that green color that we just made. So my very creative title of grass color B. Remember, that was that nice dark green, and it should say V-Ray material here. I select OK. All right, and we can open up our frame buffer and it is compiling that. Okay. So you can see it kind of update, but we might need to densify this even more because it's showing us too much dark underneath. So let's turn up that count a little bit more. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. We could probably, at this point, it's probably more of a mapping issue. Looks like our grass is probably acting appropriately, so we don't need to adjust the fur too much more, but that it's going to be a matter of material placement. So I'm going to go back in here and select that grass. Oh, no, grass B. I'm going to go to the bitmap itself and go down, and I'm going to change this texture placement. I think it might bode better if I change this to environment and then adjust that environment to screen. Okay. So what that does for me is it takes this what is, it's just a JPEG image, and what was happening before is it was repeating that. It was tiling it across the grass fur. So this reading kind of let's see if we turn this back, we can see that it was reading kind of I don't what, probably leopard fur-ish. I mean, it's kind of a bizarre coloring for grass. So so to make that more uniform, the trick is to kind of you can change this to environment and then change that mapping to screen, which is still going to keep it in the concept of a 2D surface sort of approach. So both are 2D surface using the U and the V, but one is using a kind of tiling, whereas the other one is going to take that image and spread it over the entireness of the surface itself, which gives it a much, it's going to be this more uniform um, view of it. We can also then, I think that I might have gotten a little carried away with my color B here, and it could actually be a little bit brighter. It probably doesn't have to be so black. Um, that's going to kind of act as this secondary color underneath, so you can use that to kind of brighten or darken your grass. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for V-Ray grass. Um, so that's kind of a combination of making sure you have um, your textures, like your materials, set up appropriately, and then also applying that fur and just making sure that you have these settings, uh, set to something that is appropriate for your site. Um, but then from this, this is really is just an application to a surface. So if I started to adjust the surface. I started to cut away, add some sort of dirt trail, or add another outdoor space, or maybe even cut it so that there's some mowed lawn area, and then everything else is wild grass. It's just a matter of surface manipulation here, and then making sure I have the correct furs applied to that. Okay, but otherwise this is what it's going to look like. So I'm going to stop this because it could take forever to do. Um, now I'll move on to, I'm going to close this. Okay, and close. Oh, you know what? Actually, um, I am, I do want to talk through one other thing before we move on. Sorry, before we move on to Enscape. And that was some additional post processing that you can do in here. Without having to go into Photoshop. So I'll just talk through that quickly. Just so you know that there's this Show Corrections Control button in the bottom of your frame buffer. If you select that, it will open up this menu to the right. Okay, and so they'll have these, you can see I've already have some corrections here. This is actually my natural render, but with these on, I have a much brighter and more appealing image. So this is kind of like, is it just like Photoshop or similarly Photoshop, the image adjustment controls. So if we look at these, there's of course exposure. Um, so you want to adjust that the brightness of your sun. You can do that here, or like I said, you could do that with your exposure value before you render. But that it gives you kind of um, the freedom to adjust it when you need to or as you're working. Highlight burn is going to be the brightness of the sun on the direct surfaces. Okay, so the higher that is, the whiter they're going to appear. And then as you bring this down, that reflect that is going to become less and less intense. So you usually kind of want to pay attention to where this is because once if it's too bright, you can't see any detail of what that surface is. So you still want to have some legibility, even though it's nice to have the contrast. You don't want it so great that you're starting to lose some legibility between your surfaces. Same thing goes for exposure, right? You want it to be bright enough, for the day, but you also don't want it to overwhelm your image. Contrast here is, of course, pretty important. We turn that way up. Oh my goodness. Um, so usually you want to, the default is usually fine, but I kind of like to lower my contrast a little bit. And that's just a preference for me. So it depends on the kind of feel for your image. Some people like a super high contrasty look, but I tend to like to subdue um, the image itself and kind of pull down the color a little bit, which is also, of course, here under saturation. Um, I can adjust the lightness, but I can also adjust the saturation and start to pull those colors back. But I think this is fine the way it is, so I didn't use it. White balance is actually the same exact controls as the camera white balance, right? It's just the post process option, where if I turn this on and I start to pull this or to the more orange spectrum, it removes that sort of oranginess and it balances out with a blue and vice versa. Okay, so I can still do that in my post processing. And then I have color balance here. I usually like to play with these a little bit to kind of give some mood to the image. And you can choose to adjust all of the qualities, so the shadows, the highlights, and the midtones. Um, or you can also choose just the midtones or highlights or whatever. But what that will do is it will start to give these color qualities to those each of these different layers that you can't really see in the image, but they're all happening at once, right? So they work together to compose the image. Okay. And then one other thing I was playing with was I didn't realize that V-Ray had this option, but you can actually insert a background image. So if you wanted some background, like an landscape, you can just insert the background of the mountains. I was like, oh, well, maybe I could do that for V-Ray. Um, so I found some image online, right? Um, which was it's kind of nice as an option. I don't think I'd fully suggest it just because I think I would rather do this in Photoshop. I have more control. Um, but this Oregon mountain render is what I found, or mountain whatever image is what I found on the Google. Okay, never mind. I guess I can't Google search right now. But it's as simple as just selecting load, and then it will open up, whatever image you saved. And so I have my Oregon mountains background. The problem is I don't see any other adjustments for that. So if I want to move this up and down in the background, um, I would need to uh, do that in Photoshop before. So it's not really saving me that step. Um, if anything, it's adding one. So I just since I'm going to bring it into Photoshop either way. So instead, I'm just going to leave it as that. But I thought that was kind of cool for a quick export. Okay, so sorry, I just I think those are pretty neat controls to have. Um, let me close this. You can see my lunch that I got. Okay, there we go. You want to kind of make sure that everything's closed before you switch gears. I don't want it to shut down again. Okay, so that was V-Ray grass. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the Enscape approach to that, and we'll see it's quite similar. It's just kind of a different line of, of buttons. So if I go to this option here, it says tune materials in the project. So if I select this, give it a second, it's kind of got to realign. Okay. If I select this, I'm going to get this materials asset editor, similar to V-Ray, but it's its own it's its own interface window, right? Whereas this V-Ray has all of it in its nice little whole editor. Each one of these is separated out. So so you're not going to see any materials in yours as of yet. What you need to do is you need to go to your Rhino space first, and you can click on your materials if you already have it open. That's right, it doesn't like that open at the same time. You'll have to click on your materials tab to see your materials options. Um, or if you don't see that, you have to go to your options and make sure that's checked. In here, you'll go to create a new material, okay, and you will choose Enscape, okay, and you can rename that whatever you want. I'm going to call it Grass Enscape B, okay, and just for comparison, you can see the grass color B right here. Um, that was the one we created in V-Ray. I noticed the type is set to V-Ray, but it has this nice option for edit. If I select that, it will open the V-Ray asset editor to change that. Versus Enscape, it just tells me that it's Enscape, and I have to know, that the edit buttons are actually over here. So I need to go back to that materials option, and now whatever material I created and assigned as an Enscape type will be available here. So I'm just going to select this, and now we'll be able to edit it for our Enscape render. Okay. So it's pretty nice for Enscape. You don't have to apply a fur. All you have to do is adjust a type. So you can just change that type to grass. And once you do that, you will have all of the similar fur fur like uh, sliders to to change. So some things we can do is we can change the albedo is kind of acting actually as our like our diffuse. So the we have an option for texture and color here. We can add a texture by clicking on this button and then choosing one of the JPEGs. However, I tried that and I felt like I didn't have enough control over the mapping of that placement, and it was kind of strange, so I instead opted to just change the color of the grass. So I chose kind of olivey, and then I went to advanced, and I kind of chose a darker version of that, and that made it slightly more green. Okay. But remember, I like mine subdued, so I pull it back on the spectrum and kind of, it's not going to be as bright and vibrant. Okay, but I picked some sort of greenish color, and then I can adjust the height with the texture. So this is kind of going to work like a bump map. If you've ever worked with bumps, it will kind of add some sort of variation to the height or the texture, um, you know, the actual texture of it. So bump. Um, so if I do that, then I can go in here and I can add whatever image I want to. And that will give me the option to, I can either use it as a bump map, or I can change it to maybe a displacement map where it's starting to displace those um, voids. And you can see here where it's kind of, um, it creates this black and white image for us. So I can, this is slider to reduce that. We'll see it once we render. In fact, why don't we render so we can actually see the rest of what these controls do. So now that we've got this created, it's just a matter of applying that. So if we click the start, you have to close that and then click start. We'll let that open. Okay, right? H for hide. Okay, and then you can kind of see what that grass is. Um, and you can see how it's just all one uniform color. Okay, so move this over. I'm going to also make my window a lot smaller. It doesn't like to, I can't flip back and forth very easily, just like V-Ray. Okay, so now if I open my material editor, I select that grass, you can see yeah, it's just kind of using that one color across. Um, if I choose this placement map, we'll see, does it help at all? Hmm. It might be too uniform, really, because that JPEG was a really nice, it was a nice option of it. Maybe I wonder if I'll try, um, hmm, I'll try a different texture. We'll try the wilder texture and just see if that helps. Yeah, I don't, hmm, not discerning much of a variation, honestly, between these things. Oh, that's why I didn't change my material. This is still V-Ray. Okay, so this is rendering the V-Ray grass, um, which if you're working on both, I guess would work, but it's not going to help you guys but who aren't working on it. So let's change this to grass landscape. Oh, the way down there. Okay, there we go. I was gonna say that doesn't look very olivey. All right, so now let's go back and see what that looks like if I start to tune my materials. Okay, grass landscape B, yes. Okay, so if I add the bump map, okay, so it is trying to adjust that height. Maybe it's a little too much, huh? Let's see, we'll try these other site height set. If there's a height setting and a height variation, that might also help us. You can see there, it just grew the grass overnight. Okay, and then you can also adjust the different types of it, so the variation of it. So we want a big open field of just um, wild grass. Okay, maybe I'll turn back this roughness. So yeah, so it's I find I find V-Ray like clearer so far as um, being able to fully control it, but this is easier to apply. So I'm not sure one is better, but it is kind of nice that I can just adjust a color slider and it quickly updates for me. I don't have to quick re-render or keep re-rendering, right? So it looks more like an Oregon landscape, dry grass. Okay, so but that's it. That's really all there is to it. You just apply the make sure you have your type set. You go through, you adjust your color. If you want to, you can add some sort of texture to it. just know it might be a little tricksy to, you can see here how the mapping gets a little funky. So if we go in here, I think we have to start to adjust these things, but honestly, I kind of like it better with just the color. Okay, so, all right, so I'm going to stop there for now because otherwise I'm just going to keep monkeying with the grass trying to get it, um, to a good spot. So, uh, 10 minutes over. So let's say, can we do 3:45 for meeting? We'll just do a quick break and then we'll jump back and we'll do water in the next go around. So again, we'll do V-Ray and then Enscape. I'm going to exit these things so don't crash again. Okay, so we'll say 3:45. Okay, just 6 minutes. Okay, so let's see. Okay, trusting you can hear me. I haven't accidentally touched anything to mute myself. All right, so let's go back and look at the water. So now that we know how to do grass, it's a little bit similar, and yet there's of course little things. It's actually much more similar in Enscape and V-Ray. It takes you kind of have to just know that these settings exist in order uh, to make it. So okay, so I've closed out of Enscape entirely. Okay, and I have gone back now to my V-Ray world of the materials editor. Um, I'm going to now start working on this other layer of water. So I'm going to lock that ground layer and only work on my water layer, which is now over here. So let's get a view so we can actually see it. Okay. All right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, that doesn't look like water. There we go. Okay. What we're going to do is we need to create another generic material. Okay, that's how we start off with. So we do create asset, go to materials, go to generic. I can then right click, rename this. I call this water B. And you can see I didn't get to water A because this is where I crashed my computer. So you'll get a little bit further than them. So the water that I've originally made is a good example. Okay, so we can see these different qualities that we've set up. Okay, so the generic option needs to have these kind of default uh, qualities before we can attribute what is here, the water texture. Okay, so let's first adjust these sliders so that they can support that texture. Okay, so if we need to turn up our diffuse, so the default is going to be, oh, sorry, I'm doing that inverted. Sorry, we can turn down the diffuse to black. The reflection has to be turned all the way to white with an IOR. Okay, here reflection IOR with a check mark on and change to 1.33. Okay, so it's going to change our reflection, and then a refraction also needs that same exact manipulation with the white. Okay, so it's going to refract all of the light. The IOR is going to be 1.33 again. And then we need to uncheck affects shadows. Okay, so no shadows are affected. Okay, and then the rest of it should be okay. That's it. It should just be the base for that water texture. So so far as applying the water texture goes, we need to add a displacement um, parameter here. Okay, so notice we have the V-Ray material, we have a bump, and we have binding, but there's no displacement. So if we go to this add attribute, choose displacement, okay, we have to turn that on, select this arrow button, and then we need to change this. So this is normal displacement, but we need to change that to water. Okay, here's water. So you just select that little map icon, and it should bring up this texture. Okay, and notice now my water over here, my water B. If I select this down arrow, it now has some texture applied to it. So all I need to do is select that to go back and forth while I update this. So let's wait to adjust these settings. We're first going to do a quick test render. Okay, so I'm going to just um, select my V-Ray Interactive render and allow it to run. Oh, I didn't apply it again. Why am I keep missing the key step, huh? It's not going to do anything if I don't apply it to the layer. You can see I was thinking about doing the hair, the the fur. So it got a little makes it a little slower to stop. It's like you know, the the train is starting to speed up. Okay, please stop. I was saying I think I know what my Christmas present to myself is going to be. It's going to be a new computer. So it's been getting slower and slower. Um, Not that I probably shouldn't have stopped it. You know, it's the user too. It's all the computer's fault, but it has gotten much slower over the years. But I shouldn't have stopped it mid as it was just starting to start the render. I should have waited. Okay, so yes, obviously it doesn't have material. Uh, Goodness. Okay, so before we render, we have to apply a material. Okay, so we have to go over to our Rhino, uh, layers, uh, interface, click on the material, and assign that new, whatever that water B is, to that layer. Okay, give it a second, let it apply that. Okay, all right, and now I should be able to open up my frame buffer and select render, and that should apply that water um, to that layer. Really, probably a good workflow right now is to turn off the fur because it's just adding more geometry for the program to render. Um, Maybe I'll try that in the next setting. But I just wanted to see if this was how this was going to appear. Hmm, interesting. It says water produced over bright or invalid color. I don't know why that would be. Hmm. Kind of makes it look brighter for me to see, but I still am not seeing an update. So let's adjust this. I think V-Ray requires a lot of patience. It's a good thing to have like another task to do while you're waiting on it. Especially, I think flipping back and forth in between Enscape and VBray, it's kind of just amazing. The speed. Well, as we're waiting for my computer to play ball, um, one thing you can do is start to adjust these parameters. So if you have your V-Ray open and you're actually getting some sort of scene, which I hope you are, what you can do is you can start to adjust these multipliers, which are similar to the fur, right? So you have your height multiplier, which is going to be the height of your wave. Um, you'll have the resolution, which is just the pixels that it's going to array over. The patch size. This can actually go up a little bit more. So if we want to adjust this to say 600 or 500 maybe somewhere around here, 400. What that's going to do is it's going to kind of expand that, if you think about it like the mapping, um, it's going to expand that range. So, okay, right, well, at least we're getting some mirror reflection. I almost wondered about that if it wasn't, there we go. I did have it right. Oh, I think I have my volumetric environment, my fog turned way up because I was mhm. I had my fog turned up for the foggy environment, so it's getting that kind of grayed out background. Okay, so if I go back here, the other options, of course, you have your wind, which will adjust the heights of your waves. If we zoom in, you can start to kind of hopefully visualize that. Again, it might help to have your render, um, region render open so you can kind of see these updates. And magnitude, turn that up. And you can change the height. See what that does. I don't know how much more I'm going to adjust these just because time, but you can see it's once you get this set up, like once you know um, to set your diffuse and reflection refraction to all these different levels. Ooh, look at that, waves. Um, and then of course to make sure that you have your displacement set up and change that map. I think it should help you quite a lot to get that water set up so that you have these options available to you. Yeah, it's starting to look a little choppier, a little more varied. I almost wonder if I turned up my patch size a little too much. Okay, Well, it's now 4 o'clock, so I'm going to stop this because it will take uh, probably another hour to fiddle with that and make sure it has the right settings, um, depending on where and what the location is, right? So you'll want to, for instance, mine, I would want some sort of a placid lake that's just kind of generally calm because it's supposed to be this uh, lake up in the hills and mountains, versus if you were, you know, had a swimming pool or some sort of like Lake Michigan, you'll have a much more um, intense approach. Okay, I'm going to close that and I'm going to stop my render. Mm, no, please don't crash again. It crashed, I told you, for the morning class, so we ended up just talking about asset import, but we still have 40 minutes left, so I think we have time to go over the Enscape and everything. Um, okay, let's close you. And let's close you. And okay, um, we'll say wait for the program to respond. Who knows? Maybe it will. Oh, that looks responsive. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I'm going to open up that um, material library for Enscape, and we'll take a look at that now. How you would apply your water there. Okay, so it's a pretty similar to grass in that it's just a picking the type, making sure you assign it to the correct layer, and then adjusting the sliders really, so it you can update those the wave height and um, intensity and all that. It's just amazing to me how slow it is. Okay, all right. So this is the water I have set up in Enscape. Um, you can see I have my type set up. I have some watercolor, and then I have some wind and wave settings, and that's really all it is. Um, oh, I wonder if okay, well I'll cover that, but I see that there's this caustic option, and I don't think I've covered that for V-rayers. Okay, but let's just change our water material. So we'll adjust this now to the Enscape um, uh, type, right? So I'm going to select the material. It should open the material editor window. We'll create a new material. Create a new material. We'll choose Enscape. Okay. We have water B, that's from V-Ray, right? So we want to use a new material. No, it is that. It's just renaming it. Weird. Okay. It's using my V-Ray name automatically. Okay, so we have water B Enscape. Should make sure the type is set to that. Select OK. If I go to my materials option, we should be able to see that. Okay, I'm going to delete this. Yes, go away. Okay, so I have my V-Ray version, right, with the V-Ray material, and then I have my Enscape version with the Enscape material. Okay, so now I can go back to that materials editor, and I'll see the water B Enscape. I select that, and now I've already applied it to that layer, right? So I'd already adjusted this. So I should be able to see it in the render with it already applied. So I'm just going to select Start Enscape, and we're going to see how that looks. And then we can start to adjust those sliders and um, make it a wild ocean or make it a smooth pond. I think this would be a good timer for washing your hands. Don't need a song. Mm-hmm. All right, well, it looks like it's working. So there's that. Look at that, wild water. Pretty crazy to me that it just moves. I don't know. I'm so used to these formal, you know, V-Ray-ish renders that to have it, this whole world just be moving is incredible. Okay, so, all right, let's take a look at those parameters. So I'm going to open up the material editor, go to that water um, option. And here I'm able to choose the color. Um, so I wonder if you guys are able to get this to update because I really don't see um, much of a color change when I adjust these. And I've adjusted just about every single one. It's the same sort of dark lake color. These other ones work though for instance, for the wind setting, right? You can see that adjust pretty intensely. Also, the angle of where that wind is coming from also is pretty cool. Then you have your wave settings, right? They're going to be the height of these things. You can have a pretty intense wave, or you can start to reduce this. Um, and then the scale, I think for mine overall, I want it kind of to be pretty chill. Okay, and this is the one I was trying to, I was thinking about for V-Ray, it's important for the caustics, which is the light, um, I guess, how the light is, how clearly the light is hitting the water, inside the water. So there's some sun settings that we can adjust for V-Rayers to get that to look a little bit clearer for you. But here again, I just don't see, I don't know, so far as, you know, controls for this V-Ray Enscape environment, it's great, but I don't feel wholly in control. I feel like the program is super powerful, but I'm not able to harness that exactly. Ooh, and now I'm underground. So yeah, so I think we already said that, right? Positives and negatives. So how does that translate to whatever you're trying to show is the question. Do you need to have photoreal water, or is it more important to just have this clear understanding of sight, and then these things start to become a little more subdued, right? So okay, so that's really all it is. It's pretty quick. I am sure you're going to play with the sliders much more than I have, and figure out how to maybe change that color so it's not so annoyingly dark blue. I mean, it's just so dark blue. Um, and then the other thing then is for me to just show you the caustics option in V-Ray. Um, so that's Enscape in V-Ray. Um, I think what I omitted to tell you was that you needed to go to this Rhino document sun, um, and you'll want to change the caustic photons for your sun. Um, and what that's going to do is it's going to, it says emit radius. Okay, so that's kind of the radius of where that sun is going to land on the ground. So you can see here I've set it to 500, you'll see 50. So you want to change that from a very small, it's going to be a white like sphere on your ground, to a more diffuse and you know, spread out diameter of that sun light. The subdivisions is going to be the part where it starts to, I guess, photons is a good, is what's happening, but I understand it is what is kind of refracting within the water itself. So it's taking that light and it's starting to focus it, right? And that's what this does. It starts to subdivide those water photons, I guess, so that we can get crisper, clearer lines in the water. So if you turn this up, I think your default is 1000. It's going to be rather blurry, that sunlight in your water, and you can start to crispen how that sunlight appears by just turning this little volume bar up. Okay, so I have mine turned away max. Okay, so and I see that they have that in Enscape, but like I said, I was not seeing the update that you know, they have this caustic intensity, which I'm sure is the same sort of idea where you're crisping those edges, making them finer and sharper. But I I honestly am not sold. I don't believe it's actually doing much. So okay, so that's water. And we have now 15-20 minutes left. So now we can go through adding our scene, the rest of our scene elements. So for for mine, for instance, I have to turn off my sight. Turn this on. Okay, so you can see how I had my water over here. I have my uh, earth, and then I have two different sets of trees here. So I have trees for V-Ray. Okay, turn those on, and I have they kind of, you know, pepper around my project. Go to top view. This is how I started to place them. Okay, I said I'm going to use the camera and I'm going to focus it this way and I'm going to focus it this way. So I really want to uh, array those trees in a way that as I'm, you know, starting to zoom into my camera, they form the background of each scene. Okay, so I had to pull them from two different asset libraries. Okay, so there are different ways to bring in geometry. Um, for for V-Ray, um, what you'll be doing is, and the way I typically will do it is they don't have, there's no like asset library within um, these options themselves. There is the, you can import, I think. Yeah, here you have the option to import a vmesh or a vscene or something. That would be, that's what I pulled from the V-Ray website, but they're not full of these. I mean, this is from one of their tutorials that I stole it. But it's kind of the same thing. It's a type of block. It's V-Ray specific though with applied materials, so that when I go into my V-Ray asset editor, there's already this geometry in here. Okay, so this pine tree here is this pine, and it's just repeated about the space so that as I adjust the materials for one, it adjusts for all. So that's a nice part about using a V-Ray mesh import. Okay, but we don't have to do that right now. Um, I think the more important thing to bring in and to understand how to bring in and manipulate is just blocks in general. So I'm going to close this and we're going to open up um, 3D Warehouse, 3D SketchUp. Oh my goodness. 3D SketchUp for Warehouse. So in Google, you're going to want to type in 3D Warehouse SketchUp. And what that will do is it will bring this library up for you. Okay, and there's uh, in the morning class brought up a good point. They said, do we have to use that one, or are there um, other, sources? And of course, there are other sources. It's the internet. There are tons of sources. This is just kind of the main source, and where a lot of people will pull their geometries from, for especially for SketchUp and for Rhino based modeling, which tends to be more, um, I guess I call it free modeling, but it's less parameter based versus Revit modeling, which is going to be obviously parameters that are set. And for that, there's Revit City. Okay, that's one option, and there's also BIM object. Okay, so Revit City is one. That's a good one um, for finding BIM objects for your library. And then there's of course BIM object itself, which do I not have open? Of course I don't. But also on BIM object, you're able to, it's not only for Revit. For Revit City, I don't know if they have non-Revit-y models, but BIM object, you're able to select your file type. So you can go in here and you can change your settings and start to um, streamline it down to say a Rhino model, or a SketchUp model would also work. You can click apply, you can search and find objects that way. Okay, just be careful because some of them are you have to pay for. So as cool as it is, I don't want you guys spending crazy amounts when it's on, there's stuff on here for free. So just take a look and try to find something adequate. And by that I mean there's stuff like sometimes there are things like this. So just be careful that you're not downloading something that you could model better. Like this is just, it's going to look silly. As silly in your render as it is, as it looks right there. So you can kind of, see the realness of them and then start to make your decisions as to whether or not you download them. I think you should definitely go for this one. Just go full icon trees. Joking. Um, so yeah, just have some common sense about what what you're downloading, how it's going to look in your model. Um, you can also look on that V-Ray website and see if they have the Chaos Group website and see if they have any assets to download. I pulled I pulled that one off of their one of their tutorial pages, so I thought that was kind of free scenes. Here we go. This one. Oh no, exterior lighting. That's what it was. And you're able to step out. Yeah, tutorial assets. So I just pulled it from there, and they had nice fir trees. Um, so however you find them, it's as simple as downloading them, and then when you download them, you'll go to insert. Okay. However, be careful as to what layer you're on. You can see right now I'm in my current layer of site. I actually want to have a different layer made up already. Okay, so, and I want to have that as my current layer as I'm bringing it in because it should be on that layer. It might also, sometimes they'll create their own separate layer 0 or something, or they'll apply themselves or have multiple layers. Yeah, we can deal with that, but we want to at least try to bring it in correctly. So we'll go to our file once we have it downloaded. So for SketchUp, for instance, I have these models. So for in SketchUp, for instance, you could just click download, download, and then you choose whichever SketchUp version you want. I usually try to go for an older version because they'll tend to be more compatible. Um, that's my preference. And how it kind of used to be for Rhino, but they've updated it now so that you can just directly bring in um, a tree um, or whatever from SketchUp, and you don't have to convert the model at all. It's pretty nice. Okay, so I select my tree. I'm going to choose. This is going to create what is called a block. So in the Rhino space, you can create blocks, which are going to be ways to quickly group, or I guess kind of yeah, I guess group is a good way of putting it, but it's more like a reference of the geometry. And there are different ways that you can have the block set up. Um, but I think SketchUp has probably a better way of doing it or thinking about it, where it's kind of like it becomes all sort of grouped together, um, and it has each still its respective material attributes. So versus a group where it's not really, it's just grouped together and it's very easy to ungroup. So we have a block here. So we can bring it in as embedded. Embedded is going to bring in as editable geometry versus linked. Linked will be a referenced geometry. We can choose active or reference. Active, we should be able to adjust things like materials, but maybe not the geometry itself. Versus reference, those are just referenced in another file somewhere. So think of it kind of like InDesign, where you have a referenced image and you can click update, and then it will update that image. It's the same here. You have to go into Block Editor, we'll click update, and then it will update that reference. I'm going to choose embedded because it's it's a very simple model, so I don't think it's going to weigh down my computer too much. You want to be careful with how much you embed in your Rhino file, right? Because it will start to get quite large and unruly and very slow, obviously. Even though I don't have that much information, I think it's more memory at this point. So you can see here we have insert as a block, as a group, or as individual objects. As a block, we'll keep all of those blocks together. So there's actually blocks within blocks. Or it can import as a group. As a group means it will just group those, group the blocks together, but that we can ungroup them and then edit or move and shift them and then group them back together versus a block will have to explode that block to edit it. Individual objects means there's no relationship. They're just each a separate block instance. So and I'm going to keep my insertion point, my scale, and rotation are all going to be, well, rotation I don't really care about, but insertion point especially is going to be I want a prompt. And it'll ask me where to place this. So I'm going to select OK. And then I am going to mesh. Yes, all these things are right. Okay. So insert. It should ask me where I want these things. Of course, given how slow it is, it's probably going to take a second. Insertion point. Okay. So I'm just going to select the surface somewhere. Okay. And I bet, yep, my layer 0 was off. So it still created a layer 0 by default. So I need to do a couple of things. I'm going to select. You want to lock the things you're working on. Okay. Select this guy. Select guy, and it says, does it say what is this? Okay, so I must have selected, I was talking, I didn't realize what I brought in. I must have chose individual objects. And that way you can see how these aren't grouped together. And as I select these, each of them says it's a one block instance added to the selection. Okay, so each of these is a different block, and it looks like they've arrayed them about the some base structure, and that's how that tree is made. Or they've made it. Okay, so what I can do is I can select this and I can group it. Okay, so it's manipulatable. And then I can shift this using my gumball right in space and start to place that on my site. Okay. Need to make sure that it's actually sitting in the ground, no floating elements. It wasn't. So you can see how this is time consuming, right? Everything is just, has to be just so. Okay, so I place that in the site, right? And then I need to do some test render for that. So using either V-Ray or Enscape, I need to test that and see how that looks. So let's do that since we still have a few minutes. And notice my V-Ray trees don't have any texture. They don't like, it's kind of interesting. The assets from the V-Ray mesh have a material based in V-Ray, and so the type is not reading for the Enscape render, which is why I needed to go into Enscape and adjust. I had to choose from their own source of trees, or bring in this tree from SketchUp. So it's actually kind of a nice tree, really. Might want to adjust the green, of course, and then add some color for the bark. But those are material changes. So overall, as a form, it's not bad. Okay. So and to do that, we'd want to ungroup this. Okay, we want to hold Control and deselect the trunk, and then probably group all of these together so that we can just adjust their color using our layers. Okay, we go to Material, and then We could even choose like one of the grasses to kind of just see how that looks um, as the same color, or we can make a new material, or whatever we want to do. It's just a matter of getting the material to align with our environment. That's pretty much it. So you just bring in, you can find trees, for V-Ray especially, you can find trees and bring them in. Um, and same thing goes for um, any of the furniture that you might find on there. Oh, see, didn't update. I bet it's because this needed to be exploded. It's still hanging on to its original qualities. See, so 93 inches has exploded into 1700 objects. So materials, it's back to default. Just adjust this. And sometimes you have to restart. Okay, so far as the SketchUp library goes, oh my gosh, this is just so painful today. I'm so sorry it's so slow. I don't know if I need to update or what. I mean, or if it's just really that I have such an old computer. It's been getting worse. Um, so that's the same thing for instance, for trees, for some furniture. Like I looked for a lounge chair um, for my interior space, and I found, a nice selection of chairs. If you have a specific chair that you want from a specific manufacturer, you can go on to their website, and sometimes they have BIM objects, or they have like some sort of objects um, that you can download. You can also just do a Google search of it, and you can see if you can't find that exact piece of furniture somewhere on the internet. It's really amazing how much stuff exists out there. And then once you download it, it's a matter of downloading it and manipulating it so that you make sure that you have the correct piece in your render, right? So you should be careful as to what objects you bring in here and what you're showing, because everything is a piece of information, right? So it's all kind of part of the design. It's all all inclusive. So just be smart about what this means to your space. Okay, so I think the other thing that to note is so if you're this is for V-Ray, right? You can bring in these assets, and then it also works for Enscape. Um, but for Enscape itself, you also have the option from their Enscape asset library. So I'm not sure if these translate quite well to, but they would. I don't see why not. It's just geometry, a geometry block. I haven't tried it, but pulling in from the Enscape asset library and then running a V-Ray render, um, I would assume it would um, still use those maps for the colors. So you can see a ton of stuff that you can pull from here as well if you're running an Enscape. Um, but more specifically, what we were talking about, if you look at the trees and you look at this library, you have quite a nice array of of landscape options. You want to be careful, of course, you don't use palm trees in like Russia or something, but um, I think they have more than enough. You can, once you bring them into your space. So for instance, if you select, let me just select one, okay, um, and just pretend I'm bringing this in. So I need to make sure I move my ground surface on so I can select the surface. It asks me for an asset placement, so I need a target surface. So I'm going to say that surface, and then I just pick a point, and it will place a tree there. Okay, and then it has a proxy, or it's a proxy geometry that is then it has some sort of mapping attached to it. So these are my V-Ray trees. You can see how they're much simpler, and they use a kind of mesh-based modeling rather than that. You know, everything is modeled, um, and then they have some material applied to it. They're much, I would say, dumber actually, in that they're a simplified model of what a tree is. They work very well though. I think they're quite effective. Ooh, my ground plane's on. Okay, so let's see how that looks if we do our Enscape render. And we'll just take a look at what that geometry looks like, since here it kind of looks a little lollipop-like, but I think they do a nice job of working that proxy. They also have the added, I mean, it's just amazing. They add wind to it, and the branches can move. It's just like the water. Um, Kind of amazing. Okay, let's take a look. So our grass is moving, trees are ground and moving, one's flying in space. Okay, and then if I use my named views over here, we can set up and kind of see what this looks like. Do side view. Okay, so that's what that looks like. Yeah, you can see how these trees start to really take on a fun, natural quality. We adjust the lighting throughout the day, and their shading works so well. You never have to Photoshop another tree shadow. Hmm, that adjustment didn't want to take. Okay, I will mess with that later since I'm having control issues. But yeah, and then one thing I did also is you can start to scale these, right? So you can start to take the same tree, and it's okay to make it smaller. You can just hold shift while you're scaling it so that it scales uniformly and not any sort of weird way, but it kind of just can minimize that tree if it's in your um, view site of line, view site, um, sight line. Jeez, I can't talk today. Um, but yeah, that's about it. So so for next week, really what you want to do is you'll want to set up those example renders I'd shown you at the beginning of class. So it's whichever you're running, whether it's V-Ray or Enscape, you'll want to set your scene. Okay, this is all of the supporting information for your render, and then Next week we'll add lighting and materials. So that will start to then finally bring up that level of detail in your model and uh, kind of explicitly show what your architecture is. Hopefully, my goodness, hopefully my computer is clear by then. I'm going to have to do some sort of diagnostics on it so that we don't waste a half hour just waiting for it to work. Look at this. Okay, well, sans this guy. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm assuming something like this for next week, where you start to set up those images, you give it some sort of grass. If there's water, sure, but if there's, for instance, if yours is located in a city, then you'd want to bring in that site model as probably an XREF, like we just walked through the insert command, and then start to, um, articulate what is around that building. Be careful of your extents, kind of give yourself a line for where your color stops, like where your definition stops. And say, that the rest of the city is just going to be a blank space because honestly, it's the design you want to focus on. So all this other stuff is just other stuff, right? For this happens to work because it's in the, it's kind of setting up this much larger, more rural scene versus um, an urban scape. Okay. So on that note, I'm going to let my computer rest for tonight, but also kind of do a control save. Why do I always have a hard time getting these windows up? There we go. Jeez. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, the assignment is just push forward with your renders. Um, it's still one exterior, one interior, and then everything else is what you want to add. So have fun with it. Make your space. Um, until next week, though, um, I'll let you guys sign off and yep, good luck.